Welcome to the show, y'all. It is Bryon and Fearless, and we're here to get you fearlessly unstuck. So, on today's episode, we wanted to talk about a specific sticking point that we encounter as business owners and coaches and consultants and things along those lines. And a lot of it is going to be with early stage people, people that haven't made a permanent decision about what their next step is. And that's the overlearning trap. So, that's what
Mhm.
we have. I'm Bryon. And
I'm
this where you
fearless.
Yep, and I'll get you after the intro. Peace. Fearless and I did kind of a pre-show talk that went almost 90 minutes, and so you guys are gonna get a chance to see the more unfiltered conversation that we have about the overlearning trap, and it went to a couple of different places regarding business development and just personal growth kind of stuff. But the very first concept is, and we're kind of laying the framework for what the rest of this podcast is, because this podcast is it's going to be about the learning process and getting you moving forward because there is steps, there's steps to learning, and I think a lot of times we lean too hard into the academic side of things. And so
Mm.
specifically with this podcast, we're going to talk about, there's nothing wrong with opening a book and sitting down and educating yourself. But when that becomes your crutch so that you don't have to do action, that's where we have an issue. So, Fearless, you were talking about the hardest part is getting started. So, go ahead and expand on that a little bit, man.
So from our conversation, the biggest thing that I've kind of seen is the early stages. It's not the fact of once you're already up, because once you're up, at that point it's just kind of like some just kind of getting you to move that little extra step,
Mhm.
extra step, to the point where you just started kind of do it on your own, where you develop habits, strategies, techniques to kind of get you moving or whatever, right?
Right.
It's those early stages that is just getting you up, that initial get up. And the biggest part about that, kind of like we had talked about before, is the stagnation of just sitting there, the paralysis of sitting there, and then we do nothing at all.
Right.
And then we'll have all these ideas of things that we want to do, and then we don't do any of them. And it's like, okay, fine, just pick one. Well, it's like, well, I don't know if that's the right one. You don't know. You're not gonna know until you do it.
Right.
So what does that first step look like, right? How do you know it's the first step? You don't. That's why you just take the first step. And
Exactly.
once you take the first step, you'll know whether or not this is going to work for you or not. Or maybe it may take you 8 or 9 steps for you to kind of find that groove that works for you. A buddy of mine, we do this thing here in the local area on what is it, KPAO here in Omaha. And man, the first time that we sat down in front of this actual studio with lights and cameras, and man, we were nervous and all that, right? But
Right.
man, after the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth time, now it's just more like, let's go. But I still get those jitters when we first start because I'm usually the one that introduces the show, what we're going to talk about, and then we kind of go from there. But I'm always nervous. I just do it anyway.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's literally, it's, and again, like I said, I mean, I could talk like nobody's business. You ain't even gonna put a microphone in front of me. I could just go. Put a camera and all the, give me the lights and all that stuff. I'm still gonna be nervous. But once I open my mouth and I get started, it's hard to shut me up. And I think that with most people, I think it's the same exact way. It's just that fear of paralysis of just getting you going,
Right.
getting off that proverbial couch. And again, kind of like that overthinking it, that well, I need to read one more book. I need I need to do one more of this. I need to take one more course. I need to take one more webinar. It's like, no, you don't. Stop
Mm-mm.
that shit. Like, you don't need no more classes. You're classed out. as far as educational level goes, you're done. You've
Yeah.
graduated. Let's put it to use now. Let's see if education levels up with action and experience. That's where you're going to really find out whether the stuff you learned in school and those books actually work or not. It's
Right.
not based on it's not based on what you read, it's based on what you've done. So again, that's the first step. But go ahead, Brian.
So, and we kind of talked around it, but the phenomenon that we're talking about is overlearning. And
Mm,
overlearning is when continuous learning replaces actionable steps rather than progress. And a lot of us, especially, I'm a student, I'm a lifelong student, and
me
I see that
too.
as a quality within myself. I love the process of learning. But what happens is you get so locked into the process of learning that it actually supplants or replaces the actual application of the thing. And that's what Fearless was just talking about. It creates a
Mm,
paralysis instead of progress.
mm,
And
I like that.
um,
I got to write that down.
I've told clients, stop. You already know everything you need to know to get started. All the other information that you're going to gather is going to come from applying it and failing and then learning what you failed at, kind of doing an autopsy on that and figuring out where your avenues to move ahead are. But
Right.
the book isn't going to teach you how to do everything. Something we mentioned yesterday, you got to go through a residency to become a doctor. You can go
Mm,
through all the school, but you got to complete your residency. You actually have to apply the principles that you learned and apply the theories that you learned and learn how they look in the real world. And so a
yep.
lot of times people get hung up in that learning phase because it's really, really super comfortable for them. And it ends up becoming a trap in and of itself because, you know, and we might go on to this a little bit later on, but I'm gonna preview the thought. One thing about learning is the more you learn about the subject, the more you realize that you don't know about the subject, the more you become
Mm,
aware of your gaps in knowledge and where your knowledge ends and begins. And a lot of times we mistake that for, well, now I know less, but really that's not the case. You just learned the universe of stuff that you need to learn to master a subject.
right.
And it can be kind of intimidating, but it's better than not knowing. It's
Yep.
better than not learning. So you're a lot further down the path, but people
Right.
start doubting themselves the more they learn about something. Now,
Mm,
how that plays into the overlearning piece is you learn a subject and you're like, "Oh, I don't know anything about this now. I realize that I don't know. I thought I knew, but I didn't know how deep this rabbit hole goes." And you feel like, okay, I need to go out and learn more so I can go further down the rabbit hole. And then you start falling down this rabbit hole of learning, and there's always going to be new stuff that you're going to learn. And every new piece of knowledge makes you doubt what your knowledge of the thing was before. And it becomes kind of this negative feedback loop. I think that's what it is, where you're constantly feeling like you don't know, but you need to seek more knowledge, and seeking more knowledge makes you doubt what you already know.
right.
And from a business coach standpoint, for people that are looking to get started, there is no shortage of content about how to get started in business.
Right.
And my little commentary on that is there's so many places online where you can find out how to do it, and it's made by people that don't have any practical application of the thing that they are talking about.
Hmm.
And you don't know that they don't know what they're talking about because you haven't done the groundwork either to know what's real and what's bullshit. And so you listen to them and they're just spitballing, and you end up doing a spitballing approach, and then you never get started.
Yep.
So sometimes you just got to suck it up and sit down and turn on the camera and get started, or start writing out the business plan for how to do it. Just do it and then learn along the way.
Right. But I mean, at the same time, I think that the flip side of all of that is, and that's why I grabbed my phone and started looking at it, was The Dunning-Kruger Effect,
Right.
whatever, you know what I mean? So, which is kind of funny because as soon as you were talking about that, I'm like, okay, well, what's the inverse effects of that? Because everything has its polar opposite, and the polar opposite of that would be the Dunning Kruger effect,
Kruger effect.
which you have a little bit of knowledge and you think that you know way more than everybody else does.
Mm-hmm.
And and again, for those who may not know, I own a bookstore, and I mean, here's the thing: if you ask me, hey, how do I get into that? How do I do this? How do I do that? There's certain things I can answer all day long, all day. If you were to ask me how to make $1 million selling books in today's time, I could not answer that question. And I'll tell you that I couldn't answer that question because I've never done that.
Right.
I could tell you how to open a business. I could tell you what your taxes are probably going to look like. I could tell you what type of tax system to file, whether it's a LLC, whether partnership, or depending on what you're actually doing. I could tell you who to file your tax ID with the state. There's 1,001 things I could tell you about owning a bookstore, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can even tell you that in today's time, depending on the space you have, I would probably do it online rather than have a brick and mortar like we have. I would suggest that. Right? Matter of fact, my business partner suggested it, and I'm like, no, let's actually have a storefront,
Mm-hmm.
which at first is like, oh my god, this is amazing, this is great, and it still can be. But what happens when that passion starts to fizzle?
Yeah.
What happens when you and your business partner start bickering if things start kind of spreading out or whatever, right? And that's one of the things that happened with he and I. I mean, we're good today, right now, but I mean, at the same time, though, there was some time that, man, it sucked. You know what I'm saying? So, how do you work through stuff like that? I could tell you that. But still, how do you make $1 million owning a used bookstore,
Right.
right? But there's enough information. There's enough books. There's all these people who can tell you this, that, and the other, or whatever, right? But have they done it? Majority of them no.
Right.
And then once you start saying, hey, let me see your tax information. Let me see this, that, and the other. Let me see your what is it? Your product evolution or revolution. Let me see your marketing employees. Let me see what you have. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
People can't show a lot of that stuff. What is it? The American Book Association. They they have people with so when you sign up with them, it costs like 300 and some dollars per year, something like that. But they give you all this access to all these different things, and it's like this big, huge community of people who want to see you succeed. But they also want your information too, so
Right.
then they can actually compile that and compare it against everybody else in your industry. So then they could probably tell you what's going to work for you and what's probably not. But here's the thing: there's other variables that go into that too. So my point is that even if you do have a little bit of information, which I do, that doesn't mean that I'm a rock star at this particular thing. When we first started, we had people coming in like game busters,
Right.
but everybody comes in for that new novelty. What happens though when it starts to run low? What happens when people start forgetting your name? So you have to consistently keep this thing going, no matter
Right.
what, right? But what happens again when you start getting tired of that? And that happens. So I think that there's this balance that you have to consistently keep having with everything that we're doing. So again, like I said, there's the overlearning, but then there's the over knowing part, or the little bit of knowledge that you do have that you think you can go out and take over the world, which
Right.
I did, and I we have not failed because I think that the only way you fail is if when you just quit
Right.
or whatever. We haven't failed. We just haven't figured out that sweet spot to do what we intended to do. But I will also state that in the beginning of whatever your dream goal or aspirations are, you need to be realistic about what it is that you're going after. Books today's bookstores today don't make a lot of money. So if your objective is to get rich with the bookstore, bro, you are barking up the wrong tree.
Right.
Unless you have, and I actually have an idea, so I'm not gonna. Well, once we start doing it, we get known for it. Then I'll tell you what that idea is or whatever. And I think some of y'all gonna start messing with it if you own a bookstore. But until then, mum's the word. I haven't even told my business partner yet. So, like seriously, I'm not saying anything. I don't want to jinx it. But again, I do think that there is a way. But even then, that's a hail mary within itself. So yeah,
Well, and I think a lot of times, because to kind of build upon that Dunning-Kruger thing, like you don't ever see like climate scientists uh, banging it out in the Facebook comment section under a newspaper article. Like you don't see them
no, yeah,
bickering and arguing
no,
with folks. You don't
not at
see
all. No.
you you don't see rarely see astrophysicists sitting there arguing with flat earthers like on Facebook and stuff. So I think to speak to that, and maybe this is the connection here. I mean, we talked about it yesterday. We're both Omaha, Omaha Metro around
Yeah,
the area, right?
yeah.
So I'm gonna give it to you. The distance between Omaha and Kansas City, it takes about 3 hours to drive, give or take how fast you're driving.
Mhm.
The distance from Omaha to Kansas City is like novice, beginner to novice kind of learning. Like rank novice to beginner level. That's the
Right.
distance from Omaha to Kansas City. From that beginner stage to kind of intermediate level knowledge, that's like Omaha to San Francisco.
Mm.
The expert stage is like, from going to the intermediate to expert, that's like Omaha to the moon, right? And then that the expert to absolute master of this, that's Omaha to Mars.
Mhm.
And these are all exponentially bigger jumps that we're making here. Well, actually, yeah, it's exponentially bigger jumps that we're making. And so a lot of times we mistake being familiar with a subject with having a degree of mastery over it. And being familiar with something isn't the same as mastery. If
Mhm.
we bullshit ourselves into thinking that if I read enough books about this thing or consume enough content regarding this thing, I'm going to attain mastery over this thing. And on a long enough time horizon, that may happen, but you still have to have the practical application of that. And so I think the Dunning-Kruger thing comes in where you're still in that novice phase where you're kind of familiar with the concept, but you don't even have a beginner's knowledge of it. And I feel like that drops away once you move past that beginner's phase, because then you
Mhm.
start seeing if you're being humble and and this does involve removal of some ego, like stripping some ego out of it.
Okay.
If you're being honest with yourself upon about your learning process, if you're going from that novice, that beginner novice, and you're still kind of in that phase, as you add more knowledge to it, you start realizing, oh, there's a lot of it that I don't know. Perfect example. When I wanted to know,
Mhm.
and I thought I was going to gain professional status if I just consumed enough. But here's what happened. I shot my first video with that knowledge, and the video fucking sucked. It was awful. It was terrible.
Mhm.
And immediately I went into my emotional hidey hole. Like I'm just like, oh, it's awful, everything's wrong. I don't know what I'm doing. And didn't want to pick up the camera, didn't want to touch the camera. I invested, at the time it was $1,500 into a mirrorless camera. And that's not a lot by any standard, but it was a lot for me at the time. And immediately like, oh my God, I'm doing something wrong. I don't know anything. All this stuff, I've wasted all these, it was almost a year of learning. And my practical knowledge upset what my book knowledge was. And at the time, I wasn't mature enough to understand that that is part of the process.
Mhm.
Going out and being terrible at something your first second, or 12th try is
20
part of the
hours.
process. Right.
20 it's going to take you to become adequate at anything. It's going to take you at least 20 hours. There's a book about that. I'll get that for you, but there's
Yeah.
an amazing book about it. 20 hours is what it's going to take for you to and be doing it. Not learning it, doing it. By
Yep.
the time I think you get 20 some hours is basically when you actually become competent enough that you kind of know what you're doing, but you still have a lot to learn. 20
Right.
hours.
Well, and that's the thing. I think a lot of it does it boil down to a certain level of ego that you have to set aside in the learning process. And overlearning, it kind of prevents you from having that realistic check with yourself. Because here's the thing, you go out, and this goes into actually this flows into our next section here, so that works out pretty well. It flows into the dopamine part of it. You get little dopamine shot every time you learn something new.
Right.
And dopamine is that thing that makes you want to do things. And if you get a little hit of dopamine from learning new stuff, then you want to constantly learn new stuff. Well, at some point, you actually have to utilize that knowledge, and that's where it's not as fun. And that's the part where it kind of drains you and depletes you
Mm-hmm.
because it's hard. But the reality is that's how you actually get better. So it doesn't feel as rewarding. The execution doesn't feel rewarding. The learning does. The execution sucks. It doesn't feel great. And sometimes you have to embrace the suck, embrace how bad this sucks so that you can actually level up your skill set. That's a little bit of the psychology behind it, man. And I think we do have to extract the ego part out of it. It goes all the way talking to my kids about new things that they want to try and they're not good at it the first time and trying to give up because that's what they do. It's fun to learn new things, but trying new things isn't, especially if you're not good at it
Mm,
immediately.
right.
So, and that's the process. So when you talk to, because I know you've interfaced with people that are looking to get into business. When it comes to the execution side, what barriers are you seeing with people being able to execute that first task?
So again, bro, I think going back to and again, as a life coach and philosopher, my whole the way that I attack certain things is just kind of different in general because I at least understand the psychology of why we do what we do. And that also includes me too. And listen, ladies and gentlemen, I am still stupid. I am 45 years old and I still do the dumbest shit ever, ever. I think that Andrew Schultz and Charlamagne the God have the greatest title podcast, and that refers to me. I am a brilliant idiot. Like I know where I'm smart at, but I also know how dumb I am in general with stuff. So I want to state
Right,
that before I go here. I am a brilliant idiot. I love me. I am smart. I can learn anything as long as as long as it works for me and as long as it fits in my narrative of needing and wanting to learn something, I can learn it. I'm the guy who reads a book a day. Like I have no problem with that.
right.
But I'm still dumb as shit. Not gonna lie to you. So, but okay, so I have this or whatever. I'm gonna table this one. To answer your question, the one thing that I see with people, it's kind of like they love the idea of having the idea of doing something.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
They love the idea of having the idea of doing something. And I'll say this, man. I'll say this. The greatest life lesson that I've learned is when somebody wants something bad enough, they're gonna go get it, whether they have the resources. Like they will become resourceful to make it happen. They don't need you. They don't need your money. They don't need your resources. They don't need your backing. They're not gonna need anything from you. Matter of fact, they do need something. Stay out of their way.
Right.
That's all they need. Get out of my way. I got the rest of it. Well, you don't know this. Yeah, I'll figure it out. And that is the one thing that I've seen with people in general that they're missing is the FITFO method, right? I kind of created this little analogy of it, or not analogy, but what
Mhm.
is that word when you have an acronym,
Acronym.
right?
Yep.
And we all know it. It's called figure it the fuck out. That's what FITFO is. Figuring it the fuck out. And there's certain people that are willing to figure it the fuck out. Whether they gotta, I mean, bro, how do you and I meet? Like you came into my store with with the Chamber of Commerce, our local Chamber of Commerce,
Uh-huh.
right? And then we met one time. We had a 30, maybe 40-minute conversation, if that. I didn't even remember your name.
Uh-huh.
And then I just so happened to be talking to the president of the chamber, our local Chamber of Commerce here in Bellevue, Nebraska, Diane Bruce, which is one of the most amazing women that you will ever meet in general. So shout out to her. But we were just sitting there having a conversation. What, almost a year later? No,
Yeah.
hey,
About
almost a year later.
yeah.
And I told her some of the things that I wanted to do. And she said, Do you remember Bryon? No, I don't. And she says to me, the guy who came in and did our videographer when we were doing the Bellevueopoly. I do
Mhm.
remember him. I even remember our conversation. And she said, okay, cool. I'll get with him to have him come in and talk to you. She said that about two different people, right? And
Yep.
Diane is a woman of her word. If she says she's going to do something, she does it. She contacted you. You came in, I think, a day or so later.
I saw her that morning. I saw her
Okay,
earlier that morning.
okay. So you came in it wasn't I think it was the very next day.
Okay.
Because I think that I had talked to her and then you came in the very next day. And I'm like, man, that was quick. And from that, I have hired you to come in and coach me on a plethora of different things. I mean, I made sure because I remember the first conversation we had, you were ranting and raving about this camera or
Mhm.
whatever. You know what I'm saying? And what was the first thing that happened? You came in, you start coaching me, didn't even charge me for it. What did I do? I went out and bought you that camera
Yeah.
because I'm like, hey, bam, hey, thank you for everything. Now, I know you needed the cash instead, but I knew you figure that cash part out. But that camera, that's an investment that's going to keep paying for itself.
Yeah.
And then I was able to actually hire you to do other stuff, and now we're partners on this thing here or whatever. So again, man, it's a whole thing of figuring it the fuck out. Number one, understanding your network
Mhm.
because your network is going to know some things that you don't know. But what happens when you don't really have a network? What happens when you don't really ask anybody any questions about anything? You know what I mean? And then
Right.
here you go with that whole Dunning-Kruger effect. You don't know much, but now you think you know everything,
Right.
right? And I'm the guy, and I'm consistently telling people, hire a coach. You
Yeah.
know, not just read the books. If you hire somebody, that's fine. Go read everything you can about them, interview them, and then hire them. Because I promise you, they're gonna mess with you in ways. They will pay you. People love to have their ego stroked in general. So if it comes to starting a business, if it comes to, and here's the thing, when we talk about starting a business, I know one of the biggest words that we see a lot of, and I'm gonna write this word down, is risk. Risk. Everybody's scared to. Again, they talk that big game about when I get here, I'm gonna do this, that, and the other, but they don't want to put up anything. They don't want to put no skin in it.
Right.
And some of the things that you're going to go after, again, it's not going to involve a lot of skin out of you. It's going to involve your time, energy, a little bit of money. This right here, I mean, the internet, for the most part, You can go to the library and get free internet. You can go to the library and go do a podcast. Your local, your local, what is it? What is the word?
Municipal.
Municipal. Thank you. City will have, what is it? Makerspace at the library. They have all these different things for you to build whatever you want with the minimal amount of money because somebody else already paid for it. All
Right.
you got to do for the most part is show up. That is bro. If I could tell people one thing that I have learned, that's the one thing I teach my son. Show up.
Yeah.
Show up. Because most people won't even do that. I said, son, as long as you're the first one there and you're the last to leave, I don't give a shit what it is that you're doing. You will always be successful at anything because people will
Right.
always remember your name. It's the people that don't nobody remember you because you didn't do shit that was worth being remembered.
Well, and that's the thing, man. You're talking about the idea of sweat equity. Like you're going to pay when you're executing to get the outcomes you want. Either you're going to pay with time or you're going to pay with money, and you're going to
Yeah,
pay with effort.
yeah,
Those are the lanes of equity that you can put into something. But what we have is, man, let's call it. Let's keep it buck. We're in this weird rent seeking kind of
yeah.
society where people don't want to put in anything to extract value. They just want to
No,
extract all the value
yeah,
without putting any of themselves into it.
yeah. Have that
And
microwavable mindset, like I want it right now, this and the other. Yeah, of course.
well,
Yep.
it's the lure of the. And I don't want to diminish it because I do think it's an important place to be, but it is the lure of that side hustle, right? Like side hustles are fun. It's like new ideas. New ideas are great. They sexy when they show up. They look good. Ooh, that idea looks amazing. And then another one walks in, you're like, ooh, this idea even looks even better. And a lot of times business owners get caught up in this silo of side hustle, side hustle, side hustle, side hustle. And they never spend enough time with any one side hustle to develop the mastery of it to make it into something durable that can actually change their life. And that's what happens. And I've been
Mhm.
guilty of it. We both done that kind of stuff. But for some business owners, they never lock in on anyone. They never lock in on the thing that they want to grow. And so they're always online scouring for new side hustles and stuff because it's new knowledge, it's new information, it's new dopamine, it's some new set of skills to
Right.
learn. So one week they trying to do this, next week they talking about, well, now I'm a forex trader, and I'm learning that I paid this man $5,000 to learn forex trading, and I'm gonna do that for a couple hours a week. No, you're not. If you want to be successful, I know brokers, I know investors. When you a forex trader, that's I wake up at 2 in the morning when the markets open up, and I grind all day until they close. You know, but people think it's going to be this quick way up, and that's not how this stuff works. And so we want to get back into it. One of the disadvantages of overlearning is it just costs, and cost isn't just money. Cost is time, cost is opportunity. And so when you get caught in the silo of I'm gonna learn something new all the time, and I never execute any of the stuff I learned because I learned stuff like I sit home and play Jeopardy. My kids make fun of me for it. I sit at home and play Jeopardy. I have a vast array of very useless information and trivia in my brain.
I buy books on that shit all the time. I got you.
But I don't delude myself into thinking that that vast array actually means anything. I enjoy it because I enjoy it,
Hmm.
right? I'm a comic book nerd. I can run down stats, heights, powers of fictional characters, and I can just quote them off the top of my head. I don't delude myself into thinking that is valuable for anybody except me. It's on my own enjoyment. So I do learn for my own enjoyment. But when I'm learning stuff that's actually going to make me money, I really have strong rules about I learn it, then I go execute it. and then I fail at it or I do really good at it, and then I come back and take the lessons from the execution and weave it into my understanding of this thing.
Okay.
The hang up that people have is they get caught up in this silo of overlearning. They spend a bunch of money chasing these new things that they want to learn down. They never execute it. And or they try a little bit of execution, they find out it's fucking difficult, and then they're like, well, I don't want to do that now, instead of doubling down,
Right.
instead of
Right.
going harder.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then they
Yeah.
spend money on the next thing and the
Yeah.
next thing and the next thing. And there's a whole economy on social media for people that will sell you new information knowing that that information will not be used.
Mm. Right.
And people get siloed off into it. So the dangers of it is it's an emotional thing. Like it causes stress when you get caught in the silo overlearning, self-doubt, feeling inadequate. That's amplified if you got other mental things going on. I do. I know a lot of people do. We have other mental health things going on where you have a negative self voice and you're dealing with other things going on. It
Yep.
gets amplified emotionally. Financially, we talked about it. But then the time wasted, where if you would have spent 6 months learning this thing instead of 2 months learning this and 1 month learning this and a week learning this and 3 days learning this, you would have been a lot further if you would have invested your entire 6 months. So
Okay.
procrastination
So
and
real
wasted
quick.
opportunities.
Okay. So real quick, have you ever read The Science of Superheroes
Uh-uh.
or the
Or maybe
Science
I
of
have.
or
Maybe
the
I have.
Science of Supervillains?
Okay.
Because there's two of them. I've read both of these, bro. And as soon as you said that, that popped into my head because it was so. These books are so good. What it basically talks about is it says, ever wonder why comic book villains such as Spider Man's bionic archenemy, Dr. Octopus, or the X Men's internal rival Magneto
Yep.
are so scary and so fun? And it's like, it's not just their diabolical talent for confounding our heroes, but it's the other thing about them. So it's like, what would happen if Magneto could actually move things in real life? How fast could Flash actually run? You know what I mean? Like in real life. If
Right.
Superman were flying, could he actually reverse the time like he did in Superman 2, right?
Yeah.
Now we know, thanks to Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of my favorite superheroes in real life. Just saying, I love that guy. We know that if the Earth stops spinning at one time, just stopped, everything that is not bolted down is going east at 1,000 miles an hour. Everything,
Hmm.
right? So Superman is going around, right, reversing time. He would actually kill
Kill everybody.
everybody here, including Lois Lane, right? Again. Even if he brought her back, he'd kill her again. But either way, sorry that I digress.
That's
But
fine.
as soon as you said that to me, but as a philosopher, I love looking at things from different perspectives. Even like Flash, do you realize how fast this dude has to be moved? His metabolism alone, like there's nothing that he would be able to eat that would be able to consume that many calories for somebody running that fast to be able to get a running head start to run like that. Dude, that it's not impossible,
Hmm.
but again, this guy is running so fast that you'd kill everybody around you
So
by
the
by
interest
default. Just saying.
right. The interesting part about that is now this is a digression, but I'm going down the journey, the primrose path.
Go
I'm
ahead.
walking down with it.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
they've done. There's two things. So I'm gonna get back to Doctor Octopus because that's a really interesting little caveat. But Marvel and DC, the two major comic book players, Image is the other one, and there's a couple of others. But Marvel and DC, the two big houses,
Okay.
they've done crossover events, right? And the way they describe how power scales in each one of them is they come out and say each universe has its own unique sets of physics. So
Oh,
our universe has a separate use.
that's how
Our
they do it. Okay, I got you.
our
I got
universe our universe has a
you.
different
Yeah.
law of physics than DC's and then Marvel's.
And
So
that's what
the
they talk about in the book too. Is they
yeah,
say they usually will tell you that in this universe, certain things, you know what I'm saying? There's always that caveat.
right.
Whatever. I got you. Go ahead. Go, go, go. I got you.
And so like the Flash's top speed in DC's universe, the universe allows it to trend towards infinite, right? But in the
Okay.
Marvel universe, there are caps that you can go through, and then eventually you end up either being folding reality and being almost a teleporter,
Yeah.
or it actually just breaks the laws of physics, and then you can play around in that broken law of physics. But the Flash can't be as fast in the Marvel universe as he is in the DC universe.
Got
They
you.
did they did one where Marvel's little analog to the Flash, which was Quicksilver, it was
Oh,
supposed to be a
okay.
more realistic version
Yeah.
of that shit, and it was called the Ultimates line, which I hated. I'll just be honest with you. But basically, said we're gonna make a more realistic one, and so in that one, Quicksilver could hit light speed, and he did it to kill a supervillain by liquefying her. Just grabbed her and ran at light speed and liquefied her.
Yep, that makes sense.
So there's a lot of other things. And so with the Spider-Man one, and it's kind of an interesting one, and it does tie into what we're talking about. So there was an entire arc where Dr. Octopus was dying. He had his last, his big last hurrah, world-ending event. Spider-Man went to stop it. And in the climax of the book, Dr. Octopus swaps bodies with Spider-Man and
Hmm.
traps Peter Parker in his dying body and takes over Spider-Man's body. And it
Okay.
created an entire it was a whole line that went almost a year and a half, I think, called The Superior Spider-Man, where Dr. Octopus is in Spider-Man's body trying to be a superhero. And being in Spider-Man's body, one thing he realized is Spider-Man's a genius on levels that he never understood. Spider-Man is way stronger and holds back with
Hmm.
all of his villains. And he learned that because he punched a supervillain, I think it was Scorpion, and tore his jaw off with Spider-Man's powers. Punched him
Okay.
so
That
hard he
makes
knocked his
sense.
jaw loose. And he started realizing the differences. And he's like, okay, so I'm going to be a superior Spider Man. So everybody thought he was Peter Parker, except for a few, some people started picking up the clues that something was off. But he was a Peter Parker that was more efficient. He had a whole army of robots that were doing his crime fighting, and he would
Oh, no.
prioritize like I'm gonna let the police deal with this one, and I'm gonna go deal with this one because this requires my attention. So he's a lot more efficient, but then he also was losing aspects of Spider-Man, and eventually he had to cede. I think it was Green Goblin. Kind of, he's like, "Oh, I can't be the Green Goblin." Like something happened. I think the new girlfriend he had got caught by the Green Goblin. He's like, I can't do this. I'm not equipped to do this. I need to bring Spider-Man in because he
Okay.
has the knowledge and skill set. And one of the interesting panels is Green Goblin somehow knew something was wrong with Spider-Man. It wasn't the same person under the mask. And so when Dr. Octopus switched bodies with Peter Parker, and Dr. Octopus essentially offed himself, which didn't happen. Nobody dies in comics, really. Um, Green Goblin said something, and Spider-Man made one of his smart ass Peter Parker Spider-Man comments to him. And Green Goblin's like, it's you. It's Peter's like the one and only. So
Mhm.
the idea was, uh, even though Green Goblin had all of Spider-Man's skills and abilities and memories and stuff, he didn't have the working knowledge.
Mm.
He didn't have the working knowledge of his powers and stuff that Peter did. And so he wasn't able to be the same kind of hero that the OG Spider-Man was.
No, I
And
got
the
that.
cracks started showing in the armor. And so even though he was the superior Spider-Man, it ended up the superior Spider-Man was always Peter Parker. And he had to
Oh,
admit that at the end
wow.
of the storyline.
I like that. And I mean that's a great metaphor and analogy in general with where people say, man, I wish I had your hand. And
Hmm.
it's like, even if I gave you my hand, you wouldn't know what to do with it.
Boom.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, no, like, no. You know what I'm saying? I love that story. I do have another question, kind of apropos,
Yeah.
same thing. What do you think about that show, the boys?
Okay. So I read the comic book, and I'm gonna tell anybody, don't read the comic book. It is terrible. It's one of the worst things I've ever read in my life. Not
Have you
from
watched the show?
Oh, okay. So the show, okay. So and I'm saying that to say this: the show is way better than the comic book
Okay.
because the show. So okay. So a little bit of groundwork. So the dude that wrote the boys
Good.
is Garth Ennis, right? Garth Ennis, his best work in Marvel with superheroes was Punisher. He took over the Punisher. He hates superheroes. He was always into war comics. And so he always thought superheroes were kind of absurd. And so when he wrote The Boys, it was supposed to be a send up of superheroes where they're all sexual deviants and degenerates or self absorbed or just horrible, horrible people. And
Yeah.
his version of edge lord stuff was, and it came really read as white edge lord humor, where it was a lot of rape jokes. One of the main characters, one of the main villains was like eating babies.
Okay.
Yeah, like just to the point where it's ratcheted up so much that it's supposed to be shocking, but it's cartoonish. And I think this show actually does a little bit better. They handle it a little bit more deftly, and they're using it as a sharp satire. And they even said it. The showrunners even said it. It's supposed to be a sharp satire of American politics, and it skewers both sides. But now they're focusing on the right side of things, and that's where all the outrage is coming from. And he's like, I want this to be a satire of, I want this to be a satire of not only the superhero thing, but I don't want it just to be a send up of superheroes. I want to use it as a deconstruction of our current political climate and media that surrounds it and corporate climate. I think the show is better. And I think it's a good satire of what they're trying to do. I think we lost the idea of what satire actually is supposed to be.
Yeah. No.
And
Yeah, I've watched all of them. I mean, it gets weird at times,
yeah,
but your boy Homelander is what you ever. I've always thought about Superman actually being like, just like, dude, what happened? And the funny thing about that, real quick, before we get back into our stuff,
yeah,
is that the actor and has played on a few other things. He's actually, I think, Australian or
he is.
Australian. But so his agent sent him the script and this and the other. Whatever, was like, hey, we really think you. These people sent this over. We kind of thought that you should, take a look, read for it, whatever. He read it and he's just like, oh, here we go. And he said that when I sent, I don't know if he went in or if he just videotaped himself or whatever, but he said he didn't care whether he got the thing or not. And he played it so like down, like so stoically,
Mhm.
like he could care less one way or the other of anything. And I guess the showrunners loved his performance so much. They're like, that's it.
Yeah,
That again, whether we know that that's what we're looking for or not, he's it. Because we need something where Superman's always, where I am here to help and this and the other. Homelander can give two shits. You don't care.
hmm,
It's like, and I love the show for that. Is that he's the one that everybody's that everybody respects, but he's the team leader, just like Superman is, but he's also the most feared
yeah.
because they all know that Homelander will kill you. Like
Well,
he doesn't care.
he's unambiguously villainous, and
Yes.
it's kind of that's kind of refreshing
Yeah.
because we kind of had this trend of well, we need to humanize the villains and tell their origin stories or whatnot and make them complex or whatnot. And I understand it on one end of it, but that only works if you're trying to redeem the villain, like where Magneto is a villain, hero, anti-hero, villain, hero, anti-hero. Like that
Yes.
makes sense for his story. But
Yeah.
Homelander, and they mentioned it, the showrunners mentioned it, he's a straight up villain. And the
Yes.
idea that yeah, he had a rough childhood and everything, but
He
that
had a
doesn't
horrible
ex-
childhood. Horrible.
but
Horrible.
that doesn't excuse the fact that he's still a piece of shit. And so that makes the story, that makes him more interesting than the other people on the team that are around him, where you can kind of sympathize with them to a degree, where or empathize with them to a degree. Homelander is interesting because he's an unambiguous villain. And I think
Yes.
the edge lord, and I think because the star and the showrunners are horrified by the idea that people see him as some kind of anti-hero or something to look up to. And he's like, I'm trying to play him as terrible, to make him as a terrible of a person as I possibly can, and y'all are still idolizing him. That's the entire Joker thing. The entire Joker, well, Joker the anti-hero. Let's center media completely on the Joker. Don't
Right.
make him the villain where his motives are his own, and stop trying to add all this subtext and layers to him and make him complex, and just make him his villainy is derived from the fact that he knows he's in a comic book and none of this shit is real.
Right.
So simplify it. And I love the fact that with him, and this is, we are way off subject, but this is an interesting conversation.
Go
I
ahead.
like
Go ahead.
this. It's, to me, it's almost more interesting than um well, we got to humanize him in his last minutes. No, let him be awful, so that when the hero, who is really ambiguously a good guy, kind of Billy Butcher in the comic books, they make no qualms about it. Like, he is a hero in name only. He's terrible. He's an awful human being, but he's the hero, a protagonist of this.
Hmm.
Protagonist doesn't mean good. He's just a protagonist of this. I like the fact that Billy Butcher isn't necessarily a great guy either.
Yep.
But I want him to be complex, but I want the villain to be kind of
The
a one
villain.
note asshole and
Yeah.
be a villain. And his thing is he's a straight villain who pretends to be a superhero because that's where his bread is buttered.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I like the aspect of the show. Like I said, it's hard for me because I read the comic books. That was the thing that soured me on the boys comic book. Like, oh, so this is just a white guy out in the UK who's never really been around street crime in the US, and he's going overboard with it. It was
Hmm.
cool on the Punisher, but now it's just edge lordy. I'm gonna be on the edge for the sake of the edge shit, and that's what turns me off of it. And so that's why it's hard for me to always get into the show, because I'm always comparing against the comic. But it's still, the show is superior to the comic. Don't ever feel like you need to go and look at the source material of the boys.
Oh
I'm
well.
talking directly to the audience. Don't ever feel like you need, just, it's not worth it. It is, it's terrible. It's awful. It is not good. It
Okay.
starts out bad and gets worse. Now, if you are one of the brave few that are like, okay, I'm gonna do it just because you said it, you've been warned. I'm telling
You say you've
you,
been. He said you've been warned.
you're about to see some of the most awful shit that you've ever seen in your life, and it's not even enjoyable. I collected an entire series, and about halfway through, I'm like, this is an endurance match.
An
Like,
endurance match.
every other week, some when the characters are getting sexually assaulted or something horrible's happening to just regular ass people, it felt like an endurance match. So don't ever feel like you need to go, stick with the show. Don't look at the comic book. The comic book is terrible. All right. So
My guy, I think that it's about an hour in. I think
yeah,
we can close. I think that we can close it
wrap it
up
up.
about here. I think we can close it out here. I
Okay.
I, I like this one. This was some good stuff.
Okay.
If we keep this. We do not edit this out. We keep all of it.
Okay.
Because again, like I told you, man, I think that again, I mean, especially like you were talking about Doc Ock, same thing. I love the premise of that, and not just that, but also the whole thing of something that that's a cult phenomenon.
Yeah.
But, but then you know a little bit more than the average person sitting there watching it who doesn't read those comics. I don't. I'm not a comic guy at all. Only reason why I was reading about the scientific things about these individuals is because I've always thought like, man, that's very interesting to know. How does this person float? Well, like, how much does he technically weigh? What does it mean to be indestructible? Even with Spider Superman, they went to different variations of him being. At first, he was indestructible. Period. And
Right.
then it came to a point where that gets boring. So then they had to start adding faster than a bullet, than a locomotive train, stronger than this and the other.
Hmm.
But then they developed this thing called kryptonite from Krypton before he came to. So they had to create something that makes it like, oh, okay, there's something that hurts him.
Oh yeah. Every
You know
few
what I mean?
years, every few years, the editors will actually depower him to keep the
I like
story to
that.
be able to keep writing
Love it.
stories for him,
Love
and
it.
that goes along that theme. So yeah.
Because you got to humanize stuff. And to be human is to be flawed. To be human is to die. To be human, like in the boys with what's my man? What's gosh? What is his name again? The main one of the main characters,
Billy
the villain,
Butcher.
the
Homelander.
Homelander,
Yeah.
getting great pubic hairs because now he's getting older.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, so I'm just saying, like, there's so many amazing things or whatever that I think that you could tie into this, whatever. But man, this was a very interesting conversation. I will. We did not think that this was going to go one way or the other,
Right.
but I like this. This was fun.
And we have a germ of an idea here. I'm gonna talk to you offline about it, but one where we talk about the philosophy of the comic books, and I come at it from the nerd who's deep in the trenches, and you come at it from the person that knows that's on the outside of it, looking in and like, oh, okay, and then
I, bro, this one is going to be something that Unstuck. I could do that all day long. You can shoot them questions. I got you.
all right,
This one here will be some shit that I have to shoot your way because I do not know. But you know what though, I love to learn and learning about different universes. Why not? I mean, to me, it's all about quantum mechanics and physics and all that good stuff. Anyway, so why not want to learn a little bit more about these different characters who inhabit these unreachable planets?
right. Well, here's the last piece, and then we got to bounce here. Think about it
Okay.
like this. So Batman's been around what almost 80, 90 years. Superman been around just as long. Name another fictional universe or fictional character or fictional series that's has as many stories as Batman and Superman or Spider-Man or the X-Men.
I mean, now that
These
you kept adding on to people, I can't remember. If you just stopped at
yeah,
Batman and Superman, then I can go X-Men and I can go, like maybe the Green Lantern. I can go, something along those lines, but I can't really think of anything else that's had a history that has consistently kept changing along with
th-
us.
that's where
As
I'm
we,
going with it.
yeah.
So from an artistic standpoint, look at it like this. They're always having to create something new or rehash new ideas for new generations constantly. It is one of the most enduring works of fiction. Comic books, American comic books, and Japanese comic books to a degree now because you have like One Piece that's been going on over 30 years and stuff like that. But the idea that it gets discounted as a medium, as artistic medium, but I would argue that it's probably one of the most enduring artistic mediums that's ever existed in modern times because 80 years worth of content and stories being written. about a single character in their universe. That's amazing. And so you're going to find there's a lot of philosophy that's in there, a lot of ideological principles that are in there. You can always get a sense of somebody's politics by reading how they write a character and stuff like that. It's fascinating to me that now we're discounting a lot of times in popular culture they discount comic books and whatnot, but it's the most enduring artistic form of storytelling that's out there because it's constantly being written. They have a new issue of X-Men out now, right? You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
New issues of X-Men out are coming out every single week, and it's been like that.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's been like that since the 60s and
Wow.
70s. They just got done of a whole arc where they had their own nation state, where they had their own laws and everything else, and it brought them into conflict with the imperialist powers of the U.S. government, and they had a war behind it. What I'm saying is this: there's so much in the comic book universe, and I feel like it does get discounted just because there's so many comic book movies. But comic books have influenced so much of our popular culture that it's not just the movies. It's made there's entire shows that aren't even based on comic books that exist because of comic books. That's what I'm going into. So that's what I'm saying. So for anybody out there doubting it, I think that if you think that there's no art in comic books, I defy you to find a written storytelling genre that's lasted as long as this consistently till this day.
Okay.
80 years of stories from Batman and
80
Superman.
years
That's
of so yep.
crazy.
That is, I've never thought about it like that.
I
Okay.
appreciate you, Fearless. And
All right, my guy. Well,
all right, man.
everybody else, man, I'll see you guys on our next one. But all right, Bryan, see you later, my guy.
All right, Fearless, take it easy. Thanks for tuning in to Fearlessly Unstuck, and thanks for journeying with us in the mystery. If you know comics, journey in the mystery of all the topics that we went into. So I appreciate y'all, and we'll see you on the flip side. Peace.
Peace.